the trial of Karen Reed for the death of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, is underway.
There are 17 jurors, and they're coming and going with a police escort.
I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen anything like this. This case never ceases to amaze me.
The first week of testimony has come to an end.
It's a spectacle, that's for sure.
We really heard the defense highlight some of the discrepancies between what was documented and what first responders said they remembered.
There are a lot of issues in this case.
Proctor was improperly searching Karen Reed's cell phone for nude photos.
The fact that the investigation wasn't thorough provides a big wrinkle in the prosecution's case.
They're supposed to be creating this reasonable doubt, and they're doing exactly that.
Everybody wants to know, us included, why he wouldn't go inside that home on the night that the body was discovered.
There are more people here at the beginning of this than at the beginning of Johnny Depp's trial.
It's always the theories or stories that each side will put forth, right, for a jury to listen to and decide which one is more believable.
We asked Karen Reed about that alleged confession. Karen, did you ever say I hit him?
I did not.
The FBI is investigating an investigation of a murder. That never, ever happens.
Karen Reed was drunk and angry and hit and killed John O'Keefe when she gunned it in the snowstorm.
We're looking at arm injuries with scratches. We're not looking at tire tracks.
I did not kill John O'Keefe. I've never harmed a hair on John O'Keefe's head.
Defense attorneys learn in school, first class, the most important thing you can do is identify and select stupid juries.
We're not concerned about any of the witnesses. None of the Commonwealth's witnesses are concerning us.
Karen Reed is facing up to life in prison.
I just hope justice is served for either one, whatever it is, you know.
The fate of her life is not in her hands anymore. It's not in the hands of her attorneys. It's not in the hands of the prosecutor. It's in the hands of the jury now.
Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed!
I grew up in a small town in Georgia, the type of town where we all knew each other and each other's families. After Little League games, the teams would all go get ice cream, and I can remember sitting outside on these concrete benches, listening to our parents laugh and tell stories, reliving their memories together from their own high school days, because that's how deep the roots went in this community. Hearing the connections that the Alberts and McCabe's have to people in their town, the long-standing relationships that go back to their school days, it reminded me of that same sense of community that I had growing up, where the roots of our families all run so deep that they intertwine much more intricately than what can be seen from the surface. Another aspect of small towns, aside from the connections that people have with each other, is that the governments are run by fewer employees due to limited funds and resources to spend on non-essential personnel. This can often mean less transparency in how things are run, because with no one to oversee what's happening behind the scenes and keep it in check, these agencies become more susceptible to corruption. We've spent a lot of time talking about what's been going on in the courtroom and the impact that the trial has had on the people involved. But the divisiveness associated with this case has impacted a lot more than just the people directly involved. It's also affected the entire town of Canton. And while the case surrounding the death of Officer John O'Keefe has garnered national attention, the people of Canton have expressed concerns that go far deeper than just this case, which has led to some intense moments at the town select board meetings. The select board of Canton is comprised of 5 members who are elected for staggered 3-year terms. The board is the chief elected and executive officers of the town of Canton, and they're responsible for hiring all government employees other than school employees, granting permits like liquor licenses and business openings and special events and entertainment, appointing town committees, the town's budget and tax rates, and approving employment contracts with the town's fire and police, among other things. The select board includes a few names that you may recognize, including Michael Loughran, who is the brother of Brian Lucky Loughran, the snowplow driver who testified that he plowed Fairview Road and did not see John O'Keefe's body in the yard at the Alberts house at 2:30 a.m. And Chris Albert, who is Colin Albert's father. He owns D&E Pizza, and he is Brian Albert's brother. Another member, John Connolly, has made headlines of his own in the past. During one of the meetings, he can be heard on a hot mic complaining that the people of the town voicing their concerns are, quote-unquote, random fucking citizens. He later issued an apology for that. I've referenced the Canton Select Board meeting a couple of times during previous episodes. If you'll remember, it's where we heard Chris Albert read his apology letter and where we heard that his brother, Kevin Albert, was placed on paid suspension pending investigation. But there are some other really important things that have happened at the Select Board meetings, and a few of the meetings have become pretty intense. At a meeting on September 12, 2023, multiple residents expressed their frustration with being ignored by their elected officials. First up is Rita Lombardi, who starts out just by asking if she can get through her thoughts without being interrupted.
Rita Lombardi, and I'm just going to ask, I spent 3 days gathering my thoughts so that I could present them productively to you guys. And I just ask that I not be interrupted and I get the respect that we give you guys.
Rita then voices her concerns. Here are some clips of that.
All of you represent Canton's Board of Select, which is the highest level of town government that we have. And when you campaigned, you told voters that you were qualified to lead this town. Voters put their trust in you and voted you to this highest level of government leadership. Now more than ever, we need you to show your leadership. Sitting there silent, ignoring the pleas of your constituents and giving us excuses of why you are unable to answer our questions, and just like you just did right now, you're just firmly not going to answer questions, that's not leadership. When leaders refuse to be transparent or listen and respond to the team's issues, the issues don't go away. We're not going away because our issues are not getting resolved. When citizens appear before you about the lack of trust that they have with the board and the Canton Police Department, instead of healthy dialogue and conversation, citizens have been disrespected, interrupted, disparaged, silenced, and requests for transparency are ignored. Our stuff is going into a black hole.
I'm sorry, we've limited to 3 minutes, and we're going to be firm on this.
I'm sure somebody here will give me their three for I only have another couple of minutes. Mr. Theodore, I put a lot of time into this. I know what I'm saying is not pleasant. I think anyone here?
I have no issues.
Okay, I'd like to finish.
But we're sticking to the 3 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to finish.
No problem with what you're saying, but we're going to be stay firm on this. We're going to stick
so
to
let
the
me
3
just
minutes.
finish this thought, and then I'll get back in line.
He then tells her that she's not allowed to get back in line, which has never been a rule.
You're only going to speak once.
So now I'm hearing that I'm being stifled.
You're not being stifled.
I am being stifled. Mr. Theodore, we are presenting stuff to you.
And there's other people that might want to speak, so
they
that's
want
why
to say
we're
the
limited
same
to 3
thing.
minutes.
These people want to say the same thing, okay? We are here because you're not listening to us.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. I don't thank you.
Now you're out of order. Thank you. It's 3 minutes.
This is disappointing.
It is disappointing.
And I'm going to just tell you, we're going to get louder.
The entire point of what she was trying to say is that they're all frustrated that nobody's listening to them. So what does he do? Interrupt her and not listen. Here's the next speaker.
When you just acknowledge the CASA question I had from last week, I think part of the issue is that you acknowledged it, but I still don't, unfortunately, feel heard. Because what I got as a response was, we don't need a person on that committee, therefore Chris Albert is not on that committee. What I was expressing was a little deeper than that, and it was public. It was really for you to hear that there are concerns that a leader has been put in a position that he would not be qualified to serve. By your response, I don't hear that you heard me. And that, therefore, while I appreciate that you acknowledged it, I still very much feel unheard.
Again, a town resident expressing to her elected officials that she doesn't feel heard. Now, the next speaker brings up two issues with Chris Albert directly. There's a couple of big things you need to know going into this. So let's talk about Select Board member Chris Albert, Colin's dad and Brian Albert's brother. In 1993, 22-year-old Peter Mazzaros Berger came to Providence, Rhode Island to enroll in a one-year master's degree program in international business management at Johnson & Wales. The dean described him as one of the top students in the MBA honors program. His landlord, Frank Vasella, said that he was one of the nicest, most disciplined, highly intelligent young men that he's ever run across, and he even compared him to his own son. 10 months after coming to Rhode Island, 23-year-old Peter was driving south on the interstate around 3 a.m. when his car was struck from behind by a small white car, causing him to crash into the concrete median divider. Berger was taken to the hospital after the crash, where he was pronounced dead about 2 hours later. The passenger in his car was also taken to the hospital to be treated for minor injuries and then released. The small white car that caused his death didn't stop. It turns out that white car was Chris Albert. After this hit and run, Chris was on the lam for about 30 hours before turning himself in to state police with his lawyer, though he pled not guilty to leaving the scene of an accident causing death and motor vehicular homicide by reckless operation. Later, Chris accepted a plea deal where he pled guilty to the leaving the scene of an accident causing death and to motor vehicular homicide by negligent operation, and the motor vehicular homicide by reckless operation was dismissed. Chris only served 6 months in jail for Peter's death, and he had 2 years probation. Chris's lawyer, John Prescott, was Judge Beverly Cannoni's father. This next speaker brings up some concerns that she has based on this with Chris Albert being selected for certain committees in the community.
I think you just said that you recommended that Mr. Albert be appointed to the traffic committee. Mr. Albert, as you know, as we all know, he went to jail in 1995 for vehicular homicide and for leaving the scene of a fatal accident. He was on the lam for 30 hours, costing taxpayers untold amounts for a massive manhunt.
She also brings up Chris Albert being appointed to CASA, which is the Canton Alliance Against Substance Abuse, and her concerns with that.
And I would say that there are two mistakes here. One, appointing a man who is pictured all over Facebook drinking with underaged people, teenagers, to CASA. First of all, what an insult to the recovery community. And now you're going to put him on the traffic committee after he went to jail for killing somebody driving. So I just think, and I understand that you guys don't see what the problem is with that, with either one, right? And CASA does deserve the respect of having a select board member, not one who encourages underage drinking. They deserve that respect. And I think it's sad that you can't give it to them.
And when she tries to finish her thoughts, that's when things get wild.
We're all paid taxes here. And I called to find out, what are my taxes now? I got the nicest person, the most efficient person, and the most professional person. And that's the service I always get when I come to town hall. Workers who make things run, who are respectful to taxpayers, who are lovely people, and who are good, efficient workers. And that's 95% of the workers in Canton. And we love them. And we would never say to them, like, we pay your salary and all that stuff we say when we're not happy, because they deserve the respect that comes with a job well done. It's more desirable when you live in a well-run town. It's not desirable when you live in a town that is full of scandals and has gotten black eyes and is, we're the object of ridicule throughout the state and throughout the nation. I was on the phone the other day with someone said, "Where do you live?" "Oh, just..."
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Unbelievable.
You've had the 3 minutes.
Wow.
Thank you. I'm not being rude, but we was...
When the board interrupted this resident in the middle of her sentence, it basically sums up exactly what the select board thinks about what she had to say. And this isn't the only time. It happens often. But the way that they handle it is rude, and it sends the message that they're only tolerating this portion of the meeting where they hear from the people. But they're also just waiting on your time to be up. They don't actually care what you have to say. No wonder the residents are so angry. Instead of acknowledging this, the chair makes a motion to dismiss the meeting, and he's looking around for someone to second it so that they can just leave and not have to hear the residents. The abruptness of the elected officials cutting off the people's portion of the meeting caused quite a stir, and at the next week's meeting, residents showed up with tape over their mouths and signs that said "silenced" and "we need to be heard." The chair addressed the audience at that meeting, saying that they do want to hear what the people have to say. But that comment was met with a frustration from the crowd, given the behavior of the board at the last meeting. This wasn't the first meeting that had protesters, and it wouldn't be the last. In November, a special town meeting was held, and Canton residents voted to audit the local police department. The meeting lasted almost 4 hours, and the crowd was so large that the meeting had to be held at Canton High School, taking up several rooms. The vote of 903 to 800 approved a motion to proceed with an administrative, policy, procedures, and compliance review of the police department by an independent consulting firm, and a budget of $200,000 was set for this. The first meeting since the formation of the committee for the audit was held in May, ironically on the same day as opening statements in the trial of Karen Reed, and the tensions at that meeting ran high. There were many residents at the meeting who were concerned with how the committee was formed and with potential conflicts from some of the members. Committee Chair Bob McCarthy clashed with Rita Lombardi multiple times during the meeting, and committee member Kathleen Howley brought up these conflicts of interest and some of the members' relationships with Canton Police, including one member who is a retired state police colonel and one who provided training to Canton Police Department. Once the temper subsided and the shouting match ended, the committee was able to discuss some of the issues and work on developing a plan going forward. The following month, on June 24th, a Canton Select Board meeting again became chaotic when the discussion of Canton Police Chief Helena Rafferty came up. Rafferty was promoted to chief in June of 2022, and her contract was set to expire at the end of June of 2024. Rafferty has been under a lot of scrutiny for her role with Canton Police Department. When the topic was brought up of renewing her contract, there were some angry citizens who voiced their concerns over this.
Hi, my name is Elise Cohen, a Canton resident. We citizens and Canton taxpayers are no longer putting up with being ignored at these select board meetings. You simply cannot continue to pretend to listen to your constituents, and sometimes not even pretend, but instead be fidgeting with your iced coffee or looking at your laptop, playing solitaire, whatever you're doing, while people bring up very valid, crucial, and urgent matters. This business as usual attitude is beyond reprehensible and shows uncaring, unethical behavior, especially while our town is on fire. Change is needed yesterday, at a time when all eyes are on Canton, to even consider contract renewal for our police chief, who allegedly took part in the murder cover-up, is equally reprehensible. Chief Rafferty should be fired, not rehired. And for the select board to vote her back in to continue ineffectively leading the department where her reports have no respect for her is preposterous. All of our safety is currently at stake with her at the helm. And I wonder, and I ask, how you can possibly justify this vote. Certainly it is not by reviewing her past and current performance. And the chief herself had 3 complaints, with one ending in a civil lawsuit.
I'm concerned about the safety of the people who are not well-connected townies. Because if we speak up, we get threatened, we get smeared. I had a creepy guy sitting outside of my house a few months ago. And I went to the police and I reported it. I had a picture of the car. At the end of filing my police report, I said, hey, wouldn't this be a great opportunity to use those flock cameras that we've all heard from you guys are so great and so useful? And that officer said to me, well, that would take a long time. And I understood, because I've been speaking out now for a year. I understood what he meant is, you don't count. The police are not here to protect you. I'm here to say, I count, my family's safety counts, the safety of all of the not well-connected townies counts. We pay most of the bills in this town. We pay most of the taxes that pay the police salaries. And we have gotten the message that we do not count. There are many townies here tonight, and there are many townies who have spoken out bravely and suffered and been threatened. And once you speak out, they don't care about you anymore. We count too, and we need a police chief who cares about all Canton residents and the safety of all Canton residents.
The last time I spoke, I talked about integrity of the board and what their responsibilities were as far as what they needed to do for the town. They do not owe Helena Rafferty anything. Their obligation is to the town's people. What is best for the town, not Helena. I mean, that is what your job is, what you're elected for. You ran for a position to run the town as best you thought. And if you think rehiring Helena is best for the town, you're sadly mistaken. The people have already spoken about that. So I don't understand what the problem is. Why can't you see that and address it and say that to the townspeople, we understand, we hear you, and we will do something to ensure that what we do is best for the town. The town of Canton, not Helena Rafferty or the police department. Do something that is appropriate and save the town before it's too late.
Despite the vocal opposition of these citizens, the board members still voted to extend Rafferty's contract for another year. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day, or maybe you never skip therapy day. I know that when my schedule is packed full of big work projects or family activities or anything like that, it's easy to let priorities slip. Even when I know what makes me happy and keeps my mood elevated, it's still hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you no longer have time for yourself, the non-negotiables, like therapy, are more important than ever. Therapy helps you learn positive coping skills, how to handle stress or set boundaries. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. It empowers you to be the best possible version of yourself. If you've ever thought about giving therapy a try, but think that you don't have time, check out BetterHelp. It's entirely online, so it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and work around your crazy schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapist at any time, no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/juror to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/juror. On July 9th, the Canton board meeting once again went off the rails. This isn't the only one. Look, there's been a lot of chaotic ones, but I want to bring up this one specifically for a few reasons. Now, the portion of the meeting where the public is allowed to talk is limited to 15 minutes total. And like you heard before, each speaker has a 3-minute time limit. So one of the first speakers gets up and addresses some of the policies and ethics of the select board members, saying that certain members continue to ignore the spirit of the current guidelines by swearing at and threatening to assault an individual on the sidewalk in Canton. This, of course, is referring to Chris Albert and his run-in with Aiden Carney that I played at the last episode. Now, this speaker asked the select board to take action on this matter, saying that the select board represents the town and the citizens, and this kind of behavior has the potential to expose the town to liability. This is an interesting argument, and she's not wrong. If a select board member is behaving inappropriately and it ends up in a high-dollar lawsuit, it's the people of Canton and tax dollars that could be impacted, so their elected official behavior does impact them directly. The second speaker, Colleen O'Neill, is no stranger to select board meetings. Colleen was told by Town Secretary Charles Duty that their case about their business was on the agenda, and said that there was an executive session that night to talk about litigation related to it. So she wanted to address what she says has been nonstop harassment and intimidation from the city toward the business that she was working at with her longtime boyfriend, who has owned the business for 13 years. Now, there's a small dead-end road called Walpole Terrace in Canton, and this business that she's talking about is an equipment company, and it's located on this little dead-end road. Colleen says that they own 75% of the real estate on this small dead-end street, but somehow they are still constantly receiving unjust fines and unwanted visits from an officer that Colleen says is a sexual predator, making her feel unsafe and uncomfortable. Colleen says that the harassment began in 2016 when Officer Chuck Ray, who owned a home on Walpole Street, altered zoning regulations to change his address to Walpole Terrace from Walpole Street, which is the larger road that Walpole Terrace is off of. She says that he did this by using the back door of his house for the address. After that, she says the cycle of harassment and intimidation from the city began. The city building inspector, Ed Walsh, would give them citations and fines repeatedly, saying that there were complaints against them. But when she requested to see all of the written complaints against them for the last 5 years, she was told in writing that there aren't any. All complaints are from the Select Board's office and field observations by Mr. Walsh, who was the one giving her the citations, claiming that they're because of complaints. Once again, this goes directly back to the police department and the Select Board. And Colleen says they're both corrupt. Enough is enough, and she wants change. The third speaker is a gentleman who brings up the police chief, Helena Rafferty. And he wants to know how they decided to reappoint her for a 1-year contract despite major problems and unanswered questions from the town. He mentions the department's lack of following proper procedures and policies, and he goes through a list of all kinds of examples. He wants to know how there are so many problems with the police, and yet she was given another year. If she is unable to do things the way that they should be done, they need to get people in there who will, he says. He also brings up Kevin Albert, a Canton police officer who got so drunk while investigating a case with Proctor that he misplaced his gun and badge. He listed out all of the issues that he has as a Canton taxpayer with the police department, and he just wanted answers and accountability. The fourth speaker compares the current state of Canton to how things were before the American Revolution, when New England was still under English control, stating that even though they pay all of their taxes, their services, leaders, and police departments only service the entitled select few, all while trying to silence their concerns. She talks about taxation for representation, meaning they're paying the salaries of these government employees and police officers, but they're getting no help or representation from any of them. And instead, they're feeling like they're being ignored, silenced, and bullied. Those words keep coming up from so many residents. She continues, bringing up the case against Karen Reed, stating her frustration at the support that is still given to people who have been proven to be corrupt and dirty. And as she's discussing this, the timer goes off, letting them know that her 3 minutes are up. She continues to read, wanting to finish her last few sentences. But, again, the Select Board isn't having it.
Keep supporting those who have factually been proven to be corrupt and dirty.
Thank you, Ms. O'Donnell.
To those
Ms. O'Donnell, that's it.
who find our
Ms.
fight
O'Donnell,
for truth,
I'm going to ask you to
justice,
settle down.
and our American rights
I'm going to ask you to leave,
so
Ms. O'Donnell.
unacceptable to tonight.
Officer.
I quote Captain John Paul Jones, 1779. I have not begun to fight.
Thank you, Ms. O'Donnell.
At this point, an officer has walked over to the speaker and the camera cuts away from her, but you can hear the audio and the temperature of the room shift as the frustration rises. Longtime Canton resident who we heard from earlier, Rita Lombardi, is planning on speaking next, and you can hear her at the microphone waiting on things to calm down so that she can address the board.
Please be respectful. Ms. Lombardi, this is it?
Yes, thank you. Okay, listen.
Rita brings up the police chief's renewed contract and wants to address some major issues with Canton Police Department and Chief Rafferty, and about why they have all of these problems with the Select Board's decision. Here are two of those major problems.
In 2018, the Canton Police Department responded to a car accident on Pleasant Street near Meadows, but did not locate the driver. An hour or so later, a passerby located the body of Craig Casey. This last year, when questioned by a concerned citizen, Chief Rafferty's response was, it wouldn't have made a difference to his survival.
Yes, you heard that right. Canton Police Department responded to a car accident, but didn't locate the driver. An hour or so later, someone driving by saw the body of the driver. Canton Police somehow couldn't even see the body of a man on this scene, but someone driving by did. And when the chief was asked about this, her response was just that it wouldn't have made a difference to his survival. That is insane to me. No wonder the Canton residents are so angry with the police and officials in this town. Instead of owning up to this, Chief Rafferty just blew it off. Rita also brings up Sandra Burchmore, another tragic case in this area involving major police corruption. Sandra was only 21 years old when she was found dead in her apartment in 2021. She was pregnant at the time, and the chief medical examiner ruled her death as suicide with no foul play involved. But her case is much more complicated than just that. When Sandra was only 13 years old, she became part of the Stoughton Police Explorers Program, a youth mentorship program run by local police departments across the country. At 13 years old, she met Officer William Farwell, his twin brother Matthew Farwell, and former Deputy Chief Richard Devine, all three who engaged in, quote-unquote, inappropriate sexual relations with Sandra. According to court documents, Officer Matthew Farwell took Sandra's virginity in 2013 when she was only 15 years old and he was 27. They continued a sexual relationship until at least October of 2020, just a few months before Sandra's death. Farwell, who was married with children, was the last person to see Sandra alive, just days before her body was found, and Sandra believed Farwell to be the father of her unborn baby. Video surveillance at her apartment shows Farwell arriving and entering the building with a hoodie on and pulled up and a COVID-type mask on. He keeps his head down and away from the camera. He can be seen exiting the building on the camera in the same way about 28 minutes later, after what was described as a, quote, nasty argument, end quote. Canton Police Officer Sergeant Michael Lank, yes, the same Michael Lank who was the first to talk to the Alberts and McCabe's, was also one of the first on scene when Sandra was found. It was ruled a suicide right away, and the officer who was the last to see her alive, the same one who groomed her and sexually assaulted her as a child, was never investigated. I'm going to get much more into Sandra's death and the corruption behind it because there's so much more to this, and I'll get into that in future episodes. But Rita brings this tragedy up as yet another example of the corruption and problems with Canton Police.
In 2021, the Canton Police Department ruled Sandra Burchmore's death a suicide. It was recently confirmed that Sandra was in fact murdered, something many citizens already knew. Yet there has been zero acknowledgement of this policing failure by Chief Rafferty or an apology to Sandra's family that I am aware of.
Rita also lists the investigation into John O'Keefe's death as a Canton police failure, and points out that many of those involved have not received any kind of disciplinary action, but many, if not all, have actually been promoted. She also points out that Canton PD has an 18% turnover rate, and says it's often the good employees, not the problems, that are the ones seeking employment elsewhere. Rita says that it was Chief Rafferty who turned over the Sallyport video, which is somehow missing time periods and inverted. And she says that the town is being sued because Chief Rafferty struck a pedestrian, seriously injuring him, and it took her 6 weeks to report it. She said that with the lawsuits and the policies and procedures not being followed, with no consequence, the people in the town don't feel safe. And the chief, who is part of the big problems, was just put back into position. Around this time, the timer goes off, signaling that Rita's time is up. Someone at the meeting says something disagreeing with Rita's stance on this, and she turns and addresses that person. Chaos erupts, and the same officer who approached Miss O'Donnell earlier crossed the room to her again, and when he puts his hands on her, she reacts.
Okay, I'm not speaking for you because you're part of the selected few. I'm talking about me, common folks. I'm talking about me, the random citizen. That's who I'm talking about.
Thank you, Ms.
Anyone
Lombardi.
who's related to the McAlberts, you're safe, but not us.
Thank
so
you, Ms.
stop
Lombardi.
it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Running over here. She's getting yelled at and yelling. And you stand right here.
Ms. O'Donnell, you said you were going to be quiet. You got disruptive. It is time for you to leave. Ms. O'Donnell, it is time for you to leave.
I haven't broken any laws.
I took off my
I haven't broken any laws. No, you're picking and choosing who to enforce the law on. Yes, you are. No, you won't.
All right, can we just start our meeting?
Choosing who to enforce the law.
What do we do with her?
Situation just happened. I feel threatened. You.
Ms. O'Donnell,
You ran over here while I was speaking out of turn. She just sat there screaming at the crowd, and the crowd screaming back at her, and you stay here. No, I'm not. It is inappropriate. No, it's inappropriate. Uphold the law the way it's intended to be upheld.
Let's go.
Good. I'm upset because I feel I'm justly. No, you're standing in front of me while everyone else does the same thing.
Ms. O'Donnell, you're meeting. It's time for you to go.
I'm right, though. I may be disrupting the meeting, but I'm right, and it's my fucking right.
Thank you, Ms. O'Donnell. Thank you.
Fucking Americans, people. Remember it. Damn it.
No.
Thank you, Ms. O'Neill.
This meeting became a big topic of discussion, and Canton resident Kathleen Halley wrote into the Canton Citizen discussing her frustrations on the meetings, saying that she was stunned by the rudeness of the select board chair, and pointing out that the taxpayers used to get 5 minutes, then only 3. And now, the town is saying that they are giving no minutes to the people to provide feedback to the government that they're paying for, referencing a decision by the select board to suspend the public comment period for upcoming meetings, though she points out that this was in violation of the state's open meeting law. The residents of Canton are angry and feel unheard, and we'll talk more about that in future episodes also. I'll keep you posted. I also have an update for you on the jurors who have reached out since the trial. On Monday, August 5th, attorney David Yannetti filed a supplemental affidavit in support of the defense's motion to dismiss. In the last episode, I mentioned that Juror B was actually not the one who contacted the attorneys, but a screenshot of this juror's conversation was sent to a friend who sent it to the attorneys. Well, the juror has now reached out and confirmed that the conversation was real and confirmed that the jurors all agreed to acquit on counts 1 and 3. The juror also believes that every member of the jury, if asked, will confirm the not guilty verdicts on those 2 counts. But the juror said that some jurors have been reluctant to come forward because of the amount of public attention and media on this case. A hearing is scheduled for Friday, August 9th at 2 p.m. for arguments on this to be heard, so I'll have updates available on all of that next week. I mentioned before that I wanted more answers about the Techstream data since Trooper Paul didn't seem to know much about it, and he was unable to answer questions. I reached out to a crash reconstruction engineer with 2 decades of experience working with Techstream data. I sent over all of the information that was available from the case, including the exhibits admitted into evidence with the Techstream data, photos of the car and of the scene, as well as the theory from Trooper Paul about what happened and how he explained the Techstream data to the jury and what he said it meant. He was willing to have a conversation with me about the information, and what he had to say was incredibly interesting. First, I asked him about the sideswipe theory and about the steering data showing the slight turn or the jerk or whatever it was that they said showed that this was the time when she hit him. Here's what he had to say about that part.
If it's a sideswipe, I would have expected that, backing up and hitting somebody in a sideswipe manner is that you're backing up with the steering wheel turned left. That isn't what we see. We see the steering wheel turn right, which matches the damage on the car, right? Because if you turn the steering wheel to the right and hammer the car in reverse, the back of the car is going to go towards whatever person or whatever is kind of on that side. But they'd also have to be behind the car to some extent, right? Because when you back up a car, if that person's not behind, and I don't mean behind like right behind, but I mean behind like the length of the car, even off to the side, you're not going to hit them, right, with the side of the car. The damage, it's not really sideswipe damage that I looked at. It looks like more rear end damage. If I'm wrong, tell me, but it looks like with the busted taillight and the markings they're pointing out on the rear bumper, it looks like rear end damage to me. Okay, so when she turns in that second one, because there is steering data in there, did you take a look at that?
A little bit, but it's hard for me to really read it much. There's one part where the steering wheel kind of looks like it jerks, or she moves it or something, and then it goes back.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things about the steering. You have to remember that this data, the way this data is recorded is what's called asynchronous, okay? What that means is when the event happened that's recorded, it may not have happened at the time that these other events happened. So here's what it is, right? Imagine that you have like a straw with little marbles that fit down the straw, and you're going to push them down the straw one at a time, right?
Uh-huh.
You can't get two marbles go down that straw at the same time, so it's only going to read the information that it gets in that order, right? So however that information gets there is how it's written. Now, it may have happened, I mean, if the increments are like a tenth of a second, it could have happened at the beginning of that tenth of a second or at the end of that tenth of a second, all the way back to the previous one on each side. So sometimes you're going to get events in the same line that didn't all happen at the same time. So you have to be very careful how you interpret the data, and that's why, you know, your email intrigued me, because it sounds like this trooper doesn't know that, right? It doesn't sound like he knows too much about this data to begin with. And it's very difficult to use this data for crashes just because of the way it's written, and also because that's not what Toyota intended it for.
That caught my attention. Trooper Paul's theory was pretty much revolving around the Techstream data, so I asked him to explain.
The reason Toyota started recording this data is after they got sued multiple times with this unintended acceleration stuff.
Uh-huh.
They were like, we'll fix that. We're going to record everything. So, I mean, there's like, 80 different events that record data. The issue becomes they use the terminology trigger. So there's a trigger that trips this, that starts collecting this data you get before and after the event. The problem is it's the same terminology that they use in crash data. Trigger in crash data means when the crash happened. Trigger to Toyota means whatever the trip the recording happened. And so people don't understand that. And so they think trigger, well, this is when the event happened, right? It isn't. Your actual event could have happened anywhere in that data stream. So it takes a lot of interpretation to get that data correct. I mean, to interpret it correctly. So, I mean, there's just a lot there.
I also asked about Trooper Paul's interpretation of the data, especially given his limited experience in it. Remember, Trooper Paul didn't even know that it existed the year before.
Well, he doesn't know anything about the data that he's talking about. I mean, it's clear. And to be honest, there's very few people that know that data well, just because there's so many different things that go on in there, and even vehicle to vehicle. I mean, and Toyota doesn't share any of that. We've done what we figured out by testing. And I mean, a lot of testing with Toyota stuff, and that's the thing, is that's the only way that we've determined a lot of the different, and when I say we, I'm talking about this group of guys that I've been working with over the years, that figured out kind of what's going on with this, and how do we get it out of there, and what does it mean? And when you see this and you compare it to crash data, I mean, we've done crash testing with newer Toyotas, and we pull the CDR data and we pull the Toyota data and we do comparisons. So we can see what we're getting and see where is the crash in there? I mean, compared to the trigger in the vehicle control history, where is the trigger in the EDR? What are we missing? And why are we getting certain triggers and not getting other triggers and things like that? I mean, so we've exhaustive research, and I think we still barely have scratched the surface.
I also asked specifically about Trooper Paul being able to testify to the Techstream data with such little experience.
There's no way that he can testify as an expert about that data. It's just not possible. They should, if it's me and I'm on the opposite side of that case, I get the guy excluded, and ask him a few pointed questions about the data. And if he can't answer them, you dauber him off the case, or at least off that part of it, because he doesn't know it. If you don't know it, if you can't, I mean, an expert in that kind of stuff is somebody who has worked on it extensively and understands the nuances of it, right? And this is not somebody, the person that's doing the testifying about this is not that person, especially if he's interpreting it the way he's interpreting it. They have made a huge error in having him do this because you don't know how this data works, right? You don't know how it records. You don't know, as this technology evolves, Toyota's recording more and more and more, like with automatic emergency braking and crash avoidance and all this other stuff is all recorded now too. If somebody was to challenge this guy, I think they could probably get all this thrown out, if they're smart, because his interpretations are not, it doesn't sound like they're exactly right.
He also said he's testified in cases before where the police didn't know about the Techstream data. There was one specifically where it completely changed the entire case, and the person who was being charged with homicide was acquitted because they were able to prove through the data that the police's theory was wrong.
It's one of those things where, you know, in the area that I'm in, but I've had at least 3 cases now involving Toyota data that the police didn't know was there, that I pulled. And one in particular completely changed the case. That's the kind of stuff that if you don't understand what's there, then how in the world can you testify about it?
He also asked about the Searle method, or pedestrian throw theory that Trooper Paul talked about.
Well, that's the other interesting thing that I see. If you said he was projected between 10 and 30 feet.
Yes.
And you can get a vehicle speed from that, right? There's calculations you can do. It's called the Searle equation that we call it's pedestrian throw, right? And so I can tell you the speed of the vehicle that hit a pedestrian based on how far they're tossed down the road.
Yes.
Did they do any of that? Did he do any of that kind of calculation?
He talked about that, the pedestrian throw in the Searle, and he said that that's what he used. But he said that he couldn't do calculations because it would vastly underestimate the speed of the car because it was a side swipe.
Yeah, which makes no sense. You do the calculations and then you decide if they're accurate. The math is what the math is. And so if he's not doing those calculations, or the other thing is if he did them and they didn't match the speed that he wanted them to match, then he just says he can't do them.
Wow. Could that be why Trooper Paul kept saying that he couldn't do the calculations? Because he did them and they didn't line up with what he needed the calculations to be for his theory? Talked a little more about the calculations, the speed, and the injuries. I asked specifically about the 24.2 miles per hour in reverse from the data. That's what they're saying, that it was 24 miles an hour in reverse for 62 feet, and that's how she hit him.
That thing must have been screaming.
Yeah, how do you...
I don't even buy it. I don't buy it. Not at all.
I also brought up the 15 mile per hour testing from the ARCA experts. It turns out he's done a lot of the 15 mile per hour testing as well. The experts that did the testing for the FBI, they did testing about the damage that they would have in reverse going 15 miles an hour. And it was more than what the actual damage was. So they were like, if our damage was more at 15 miles an hour, at 24 miles an hour, it would have been destroyed. So that's what part of what they tested and said, it doesn't line up. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. That's completely wrong. I mean, we do low speed testing all the time. And I mean, to look at damage to vehicles. And I mean, we caved in the backs of cars at like 15 miles an hour. You know, if you miss the bumper, you could cave in the whole back of it. We've seen it. So, I mean, this, again, none of this makes any sense, but, you know, sounds fishy to me.
Yeah.
At this point. And the more you tell me, the more it sounds like, you know, something's going on here because none of the things you've told me about the facts of the case add up to what the theory is. So it really doesn't. I mean, I would 100% agree with you on that.
He does say that it takes looking at everything as a whole to make a final conclusion.
You know, a good investigation into any kind of, especially pedestrian crash, you got to look at everything. You got to look at the damage. You got to look at the injury patterns. I mean, this guy was killed, right? I mean, this is not, okay. So, I mean, autopsy photos and, you know, bruises, line up the contact on the person with the contact on the car, because you can. I mean, you get postmortem bruising when you get pedestrian injuries, always. I mean, everyone pedestrian crash I've ever worked, if the person's alive when they're hit, you will get some postmortem bruising.
At this point, I hadn't yet told him about the lack of bruising. So when he said that there is always bruising on pedestrian crashes, I had to break the news. No bruising whatsoever. The only kind of fracture that he had was the back of his head, and then he also had a laceration on his eyebrow, and he had the abrasions on his arm, and that's it. But there was no bruising, no fractured anything. And the medical examiners that testified all said that if it was a pedestrian accident, that they would expect to see bruising at minimum, but a lot of times, you know, bruising and fractures. But he had none.
Absolutely. I mean, you get fractures. Depending on the force of the accident, it's, you know, fractured femur. You know, it depends on how much he gets run over. You know, you can't get fractured skull, but usually that would lead to more damage to the vehicle, especially getting hit in the back, probably breaks a window, you know, things like that. And like I said, the speeds don't line up. There's just a lot of evidence that just doesn't match with the picture that's being painted here with this data.
So his final thoughts on Trooper Paul's theory?
That's against the laws of physics. I mean, there's just a lot of things in all of this that don't make a lot of sense.
And his final thoughts on the case.
Really strongly encourage the defense to just get somebody good. I think that they can poke enough holes in this thing that they could I don't know if they can, maybe they can hang the jury again, but I think they could probably get him not guilty just based on the evidence. And if you can get him tossed on talking about stuff he has known nothing about.
It was really interesting to hear the perspective from an expert engineer who has never heard of the Karen Reed case, and to get some answers about the Techstream data. It will also be interesting to see how that plays out in the next trial. Speaking of which, the hearing for the judge to hear the arguments for and against the dismissal of counts 1 and 3 will be this Friday, so next week's episode should be pretty explosive. I'm going to keep you updated about the case with Karen Reed, but in future episodes, I'm also going to dive into more of the Sandra Burchmore case. In March, federal investigators approached multiple people close to Sandra to interview, so with the FBI now involved in the investigation, maybe there will be some answers, finally. Sandra's estate is also suing the 3 former police officers for wrongful death, accusing them of engaging in grooming and repeated assaults that went on for almost a decade. One of the officers, Matthew Farwell, agreed to a decertification where he will no longer work in law enforcement, and his name will be added to a national database of sanctioned officers. The state's post-commission hearing accused Matthew Farwell of statutory rape against Sandra Burchmore when she was only 15 and he was 27, and also of lying to state police troopers about his communications and relationship with Burchmore. This week, on Tuesday, August 6th, Matthew's twin brother, William, also had a post-commission hearing. William is accused of using the police database to conduct unauthorized searches of Sandra, sexting her while on duty, and lying to state investigators about his communication and relationship with her. His attorney appeared on his behalf during the Zoom conference, informing the Post representative that he did not want to accept the same ban that his twin brother did, and adding that there has never been any evidence that his client had sexual relations with Sandra while she was a minor. William Farwell has a decertification hearing in November. There's a lot more to this case, and it's heartbreaking to read over the court documents. It goes beyond just these 3 officers, and the details will shock you. Another reminder, I'll be offering subscriptions to 13th Juror Podcast in the near future, where members will have access to extended and bonus episodes, so I'll keep you posted on that. And while we're keeping our eyes and ears on Karen Reed, Sandra Burchmore, and Canton, there's also a new case that we'll be discussing soon, so more info on that in the coming weeks. If there's anything I've learned about this case and this town so far, it's to always expect the unexpected. My name is Brandy Churchwell, creator of 13th Juror Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with your friends. For more information, photos, and episode guides, visit our website at 13thjurorpodcast.com.